$34 trillion in debt sounds scary. Should people be afraid?
No, they shouldn't. What that 34 trillion is telling you is that over the long sweep of history, the US government has put that many dollars into our hands without taxing them away. So what it is it's our after-tax savings that's being reported.
I always thought going into debt was a bad thing, but apparently our $34 trillion US debt right now is just an indication of our after-tax savings. Modern monetary theory is certainly a thing, and that is what we are going to be talking about today. We are going to be joined by Smart Silver Stacker as we analyze some of the crazy things that this lady said in a very short amount of time. So let's get into it, but do me a favor before we do, don't forget to like and subscribe and help us continue to grow. My channel is sponsored by SDBullion.com. New customers can get their first order of gold or silver at spot by going to SDBullion.com/new. Hey everybody, welcome back. We are joined once again by Smart Silver Stacker, and today we have a big one for you that Smart and I are going to be talking about. This is an article on NPR. It's an interview with a lady named Stephanie Kelton, who is a big believer in MMT, which is modern monetary theory. Now, I discovered this video on Yankee Stacking's channel, so a huge shout out to him. He did a video on this the other day, but I wanted to discuss this with Smart. Smart, I shared the interview with you earlier, but did you have a chance to listen to it?
Well, I actually watched Yankee's video. I know you've got some clips queued up, though, so I'm eagerly awaiting listening to those again and commenting on them because this interview was alarming, to say the least.
It's alarming, and if you listen to the entire thing, and we'll put a link for that down below, I encourage all of you to listen to this if you want to hear some crazy nonsense. It's propaganda at its finest. I believe that's what you actually tested me, isn't it? And let's start with this first clip, and we will just start discussing what she is talking about here, because she is defending our massive national debt. Keep in mind, over $34 trillion. She is defending it by calling it a savings and a good thing. Here, let's go with this first clip. Here we go.
So $34 trillion in debt sounds scary. Should people be afraid?
No, they shouldn't. What that 34 trillion is telling you is that over the long sweep of history, the US government has put that many dollars into our hands without taxing them away. So what it is it's our after-tax savings that's being reported.
So, Smart, what that's telling us is the government has added $34 trillion into our savings. Can you rationalize that at all?
Well, I can rationalize it in the sense that it's obviously propaganda of the highest order, and it's really kind of a disturbing form of propaganda. If you remember in George Orwell's 1984, one of the moves that the party makes to control public perceptions is they redefine words. Peace is war, war is peace, freedom is slavery, and in this case, you'd say debt is saving. So this sounds like something that is straight out of the Ministry of Truth to me, and I don't believe it's true. I mean, what she's saying here is, first of all, I want to comment on the fact that she says this has occurred over the long sweep of history, because she must not have been paying attention in history class. It took more than 200 years for the United States government to rack up its first $1 trillion in debt, and we were talking about this before we actually jumped on this video. I mean, if you look at the national debt, even just 12 years ago, it was around $16 trillion in 2012. So over the past 12 years, the debt has more than doubled. And so the vast majority of this debt hasn't been accrued over the long sweep of history. It has been accrued very recently. And what we're witnessing is an exponential growth.
Yeah, it's an exponential growth, and it seems like it's not stopping. In fact, if you look at the debt clock, they have a time machine, and it allows you to go forward in the future. I'll put this up on the screen for everyone to see this. We can go forward just 4 years. In 4 years, it is now projecting our deficit to be $46 trillion. So like you said, we were $16 trillion in 2012. Going forward to 2028, which is only 16 years, we have now tripled that debt. So yeah, saying, like you said, that it's over the course of time, over the course of the entire U.S. history, no, it really isn't, especially not on this scale. And I think, from me to you, I think we're really starting to see the repercussions of that. I mean, imagine what life would be like today if we actually didn't have this massive inflation that we've had to deal with over time. And we've talked in other videos before about how inflation hasn't went away. It's not because that the numbers are getting smaller, that things are getting cheaper. It just means now they're increasing a little bit slower. But we are still dealing with the repercussions of what has happened. And I don't think we're done. I really don't. What do you think?
I would agree that, first of all, it is important to note that all of this debt is directly linked to the phenomenon of inflation that we are experiencing. I mean, it's no surprise that really the debt began to accrue in earnest when the dollar was decoupled from gold by Richard Nixon back in 1971. And since then, the dollar has lost a tremendous amount of value. The debt has absolutely exploded. And as you say, the trend is not stopping. We are going to witness continued growth of this debt. Part of the problem is that we've got interest rates which are compounding the size of the debt. The Fed has got interest rates higher. You know, they say that that is to attempt to fight inflation, but of course that fight is doomed as long as the deficit spending continues and the debt begins to grow. And a lot of that has to do with the Federal Reserve, because one of the things that these MMT theorists seem to forget is that, someone's got to buy all of that debt. And the Federal Reserve, their balance sheet's sitting at $7.7 trillion right now. They've bought quite a bit of it. That has led to a massive devaluation of the currency. And the inflation is also beginning to grow at an exponential pace. And I think that that's something that we're going to see get worse as we move forward, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with you. And like I said, it's really scary what we're looking at here. And, many people, Smart, I don't know if you watch my channel at all, but I'm very, what we will call, I don't want to say centered, because that's not really where I am. I'm very much a believer in stacking gold and silver. And this is why. Now, I don't believe that people should put themselves in dire financial straits. We've talked about this before. To do so, but, when you look at some of the videos that I released recently talking about how premiums went down and calling coin shops to see if you needed to sell it, what you could get for it, many people would wonder why I stack silver at all. And this is why, because it's not that I'm trying to fear people into stacking silver. You should make smart decisions doing so. Gold as well, by the way. But this is why I would rather have something that is a hard asset that isn't tied to the mess that's going on with the US dollar.
Absolutely. Yeah. The US dollar. I mean, we know that the game plan for the dollar is continued devaluation. That's not even a secret. I mean, the Federal Reserve tells us that their objective is to devalue the currency by 2% on an annual basis with their 2% inflation target. And of course, over the past several years, they've far exceeded that goal. And if you really look at inflation, not just the way that the government measures it with the rigged CPI numbers and the massaged data, I mean, the inflation is a lot worse than what they're telling us.
I don't disagree. Now, the next part of this, by the way, in this interview, the interviewer asked this lady, she asked, should the U.S. budget be treated the same way as a household budget, only spending cash that it has? Listen to the response for this question.
If they did that, then of course the rest of us couldn't accumulate any surplus. The government always took back exactly the amount that it put in. Then by definition, the rest of us wouldn't end up with any extra dollars to hold on to as part of our wealth, as part of our savings.
Now, what she's saying here is which I totally understand. The government has to create the currency and then use it for us to be able to get a hold of it. But the government doesn't just give us the currency, does it? Like, all this debt that's being created, it's not like it's being used, to help every American out. It's not. I mean, so much of it's being shipped overseas. So she can argue all that she wants about this debt being created, and that's how we get our savings, that's how we get our spending money. But in reality, not anywhere near all of that is hitting us. And even if it's not all going overseas, the majority of it is going to, like you had spoke to earlier, it's going to big military contractors, so on and so forth. What are your thoughts on what she had said here, though? I'd love to hear your position here.
Sure. Well, I think like all good lies and all good propaganda, her statements are sort of half-truths. They're not complete bold-faced lies. They're just, telling you part of the story. And it's true that in our debt-based fiat currency system that we've had in place since 1971, that our economy is addicted to the constant creation of new debt, because in the system that we have a debt-based currency. You don't get more currency until you get more debt. And whether that be through government borrowing or fractional reserve banking practices, the whole system requires a constant expansion of the money supply and constant inflation to run. But I mean, when we had sound money, when the government wasn't racking up these massive debts, people were still able to save money. And the difference was that back then the money was actually a store of value. It wasn't constantly devaluing fiat paper script that we have today. And it's true that, under the system we have, they do have to keep expanding the debt. And to your point that, we're not really benefiting from that. That's right. Because when the government borrows this money into existence, they get first dibs. So they get to spend the money before it's devalued. And all that really does is it benefits a few privileged, wealthy members of society, the people who are on the government dole, the defense contractors, the large businesses in which the government sort of runs this system. But all it does for us, the average person, is it means that we have to pay more for everything, because all these dollars being put into circulation, I mean, they're not going into Americans' savings accounts. Savings are dwindling. Debt, consumer debt, is skyrocketing. And this is all a result of the increased cost of living and this hollowed out economy that we're experiencing as a result of all of this debt and oversized federal government and the huge amount of spending that's going on.
No, you're 100% right. Cost of living, inflation, everything is really starting to affect people. I mean, just the other day, I did an interview with Brian from Vermilion. We were talking about how silver sales were down 65 to 75% of what they were just middle of last year. And what I noticed is in the comments on that video, many people said that they are hurting and they are having to sell. And that's why you're seeing a lot of silver flood the market. I think people are starting to get desperate. Those people that were buying silver, wanting to put it aside for an emergency, well, unfortunately, we see that emergency happening a lot quicker than we thought. And with the silver prices and premiums being down, these people are being forced to sell their silver at a loss, which is really unfortunate. There had to have been 50 people that commented that. Smart, I have another clip here queued up. Did you want to talk about it? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one other thing about the kind of general prosperity being linked to the debt. I mean, it's easy enough to refute this point that she's making because, I mean, the debt is exploding at a record pace. If you look at the first quarter of fiscal year 2024, the deficit was $500+ billion. So it took us 200 years to rack up the first $1 trillion in debt. Now we're racking up, if you annualize that, more than $2 trillion per year in debt. So you'd think we'd all be richer than ever before if the debt was linked to our prosperity. But what you're witnessing is exactly the opposite.
Agreed. And you know what you had mentioned earlier, we're going to go back to near the beginning of this chat. You had talked about how it'd take us 200 years to hit our first $1 trillion in debt?
More than 200. Yeah, I don't know the exact figure. I think it was about 206, 207 years before we hit $1 trillion in the national debt.
Cool. Our budget deficit today is higher than that at $1.75 trillion. That means each year we are spending more than what took us over 200 years to accumulate. And now it's just every single year.
Yeah, it's incredible. And, the thing is that all of this central bank planning, all of these interventions, all of these bailouts, they've prevented the free market from doing its job of creating a healthy, vibrant economy. And so now the only thing really keeping this thing chugging along is the massive deficit spending on the part of the government.
Yeah, you're right. I have another clip queued up here, though. I want to get to this before the video gets too long. Are you ready for this one?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Well, I mean, what are the risks associated with the growing national debt?
Well, they're not economic and they're not financial.
Okay.
And in the downgrade, I think, the rating agencies have made clear over time.
Now I'm going to pause it here. She's talking about the Moody's downgrade for the U.S. For the U.S.'s credit. You know that, right?
Yes, I believe that was the last holdout, the last ratings agency to have not done that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I don't know 100% that you're right, but that sounds correct. We'd have to double check on that. But let's restart that clip. Here we go.
Well, I mean, what are the risks associated with the growing national debt?
Well, they're not economic and they're not financial.
Okay.
And in the downgrade, I think, the rating agencies have made clear over time that, what they're thinking about is not the federal government's ability to pay, because that is unquestioned. When you are the issuer of the currency, of course, you can never run out. You can't be forced into a situation where you cannot afford to make the payments, to meet the obligations.
I'm not even going to talk here. I just want to hear your response to that.
Well, I would disagree with her statement here that the consequences of the debt would not be economic or they would not be financial, because ultimately, if you study history, if you look back at the broad expanse of history, empires who borrow too much and accumulate too much debt, they tend to not fare very well economically or financially. And unfortunately, I think that's the direction we're heading in as well. Now, she's correct that we have the world reserve currency. We have the ability to pay our debt in any quantity, but the cost of that will be devaluation of the currency. And I mean, you can just look back to Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, in congressional testimony. I think it was in 2005. Now, he was talking specifically about Social Security benefits, but the thing he said here really applies broadly to the debt as a whole. And he said that we can guarantee payments in any quantity that you can't guarantee is their purchasing power. And that ultimately will be the consequence of running these tremendous, enormous deficits because, let's talk about the geopolitical implications here. I mean, for a long time, since the 1970s, the US, we've had the petrodollar system set up. Countries around the world, all their oil sales have been in US dollars. They've been buying up all of our debt. Well, that looks like it's about to come to an end with the rise of the BRICS and the current global deglobalization trend that we are witnessing. And so who's going to buy up all this debt? The rest of the world doesn't seem as interested in U.S. treasuries as they have been historically. So ultimately, we know who the buyer and lender of last resort is going to be. It's going to be the Federal Reserve. Over the past decade and a half, since the 2008 great financial crisis, the Fed has bought about $9 trillion worth of U.S. debt already. So that's direct debt monetization by the central bank. Now, they tried to walk that back a little bit with quantitative tightening, but now they've only gotten down to about $7.7 trillion on their balance sheet. Nowhere close to normalizing it, as Ben Bernanke promised eventually the balance sheet would be normalized. And now the way that things are going, I mean, we're in an election year. The banking system is largely insolvent. We've got a commercial real estate crisis brewing. I think they're going to have to get in there and start buying more of this debt. And that's what you see in countries that ultimately experience hyperinflations, is the central bank coming in and monetizing large amounts of government debt. It's extremely inflationary. And so there will be financial consequences for this. There will be economic, and there may even be consequences on the global stage as, we seek to defend the petrodollar system, which has helped to enable all of this borrowing. I don't think it's a surprise that right now, as that system comes under pressure, we're seeing the outbreak of conflict in the Middle East. I mean, that's maybe a little bit outside of the realm of this video, but it's just, there's going to be consequences for all the debt.
Don't disagree. And you said most of what I wanted to say, but I just want to reiterate that I don't understand how anybody can sleep at night trying to, what do you want to say, justify the fact that, yeah, the government can pay any of their debt in any amount at any time that they wish just by creating more of the currency. Because as you said, that's what leads to a collapse of the currency. It leads to debasement. And yeah, okay, congrats. The U.S. can print $34 trillion and pay this all off at once. What does that mean for me and you? Well, it means me and you are going to be paying so much more just for general cost of living. And it is going to be a nightmare if something like that would happen. So it doesn't matter if they can do it. They can't do it because they know what will happen. They know the repercussions of such a thing. And I don't understand, like I said, how anyone can even sleep at night thinking that's okay. And then, like I said, going even farther to try and justify doing it.
Well, I think that it's perhaps the game plan is to devalue the currency. And, they float people like this out here to try to control the public perception and make everybody feel okay that the debts are exploding. But you got to understand who benefits the most from inflation. And it's the biggest debtors in society, and the wealthiest members of society are the beneficiaries of inflation, because if you're a massive debtor like the US federal government is, your debts can then be paid off in devalued currency. And if you are in the top 1% of society, you hold all the assets. Well, what goes up in value when the currency goes down? I mean, the value of assets increases as inflation increases. It's part of why we've seen this massive rise in a variety of asset classes since the 2008 financial crisis. Huge stock market bubbles have been inflated. A huge bubble in cryptocurrency has been inflated. Real estate has gone to enormous valuations. All this money has to go somewhere. And so, it's not to our benefit when the currency is devalued. If you're just out there, spending a good amount of your income on housing and food and medical care, it really sucks when the inflation goes up. But if you're a wealthy person who's sitting on a lot of assets, you bought those with debt, and then your debt is inflated away, well, it's really good for you.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. In fact, maybe I should just go out and take a bunch of debt. You know, why not? I'm kidding, of course. Debt is the enemy. I don't recommend anyone doing so. But I mean, you make a valid point. Imagine if you just go out, let's just buy a $500,000 house, and we'll buy a $200,000 car, and we'll get ourselves $2 million in debt. And then we'll use that debt to stack up a bunch of whatever asset we think is going to be worth a ton more when we do have a debasement or a major inflationary event. And then we just sell that asset to pay off all of our debts, and we profit, right?
Yeah, I understand that's kind of tongue in cheek, but for many years, the central bank held interest rates down near 0%. But, you and I could never borrow at that rate of interest. I mean, maybe if you go out and buy a house, you could have gotten a pretty competitive rate, a nice low rate. But for the most part, you don't have access to the type of credit that the wealthy do, and nor do I. And so we're not even allowed to participate in that part of it. If you want to take a credit card and go buy things, well, you're going to be paying 21%, these usurious interest rates. Whereas wealthiest members of society, the plutocrats, they were borrowing near zero for a long time, buying up assets which were gaining in values. So again, it's just another way that it's sort of like a wealth transfer from the poor and the middle class to the wealthiest members of society. And I think that's what's going on. I mean, it's no secret that central banks like to inflate the currency, and the interests that support them also benefit from that.
Absolutely. So we're going to leave it at that, though, Smart. I do, however, just as always, want to give you any last thoughts. Let me ask you this. What are your thoughts on MMT?
I think it's a form of magical thinking. I don't know. The people who really go out there and promulgate this, like these professors, maybe they just don't have any experience in the real world. Maybe they've just been in an echo chamber for so long that they really believe this stuff. I also suspect that there's an active attempt to kind of promote this way of thinking to enable central banks to continue to devalue the currency and convince the public that there won't be any consequences. I mean, me personally, I'm getting into hard assets. I think that's a great way to shelter yourself, to insulate yourself from the ultimate outcome of MMT. Right now, all this money that's floating around out there has gone into tech stocks. It's gone into cryptocurrency. I think when it becomes clear what level of nonsense is being spouted by these MMT proponents, a lot of that money, maybe not even that much of it, but even if a small amount of that money moved into the precious metals market, especially physical metal, it would cause a significant change in prices. So, that's why I'm kind of taking out an insurance policy against MMT by stacking gold and silver.
Smart, thanks for joining me, man. It was great. We'll try and do more stuff like this in the future, guys. Do me a favor, don't forget to subscribe. And also, do me a favor and subscribe to Smart Silver Stacker. I'll put a link for his channel down below. Great channel, very smart guy, and always a blast to have here. So thanks again, Smart.
I look forward to doing it again.
Sounds good.